The sea was quiet, too quiet, as if it knew what was coming. A thin mist drifted over the horizon, swallowing the last traces of dawn. Beneath that gray sky, an armada waited, hundreds of ships anchored in uneasy silence, their steel hearts beating in rhythm with the distant thunder of waves. The air carried the smell of oil, salt, and fear. Somewhere deep below deck, a young radar operator watched a glowing green circle pulse in the dark. Every rotation of the beam was a second closer to death. He could hear the low hum of the machine, the heartbeat of modern war, whispering through the wires. Far away, over the southern islands of Japan, engines roared to life. Kamikaze pilots tightened the straps of their harnesses and bowed their heads in prayer. They had been told their sacrifice would save the homeland. They would become wind, fire, and light. Their targets, those same ships glimmering on the horizon like ghosts. Between them lay a new kind of battlefield, invisible and merciless. Waves of radio energy, radar pings, jamming frequencies. Each signal a weapon, each pulse a threat. The Americans called it electronic warfare. The Japanese called it divine wind. Both sides believed the other would blink first. But in truth, no one blinked. Above the sea, the wind began to change. Static filled the airwaves. The first dots appeared on the radar screen, tiny moving sparks of doom. The operator swallowed hard, called out a bearing, and the sirens screamed across the fleet. Men ran to their stations, guns swung skyward, and the ocean exploded in fire. Somewhere, beyond that wall of smoke, a pilot smiled as his plane dove straight into the heart of the storm. And in that moment, technology and faith met face to face, bound together by one terrible certainty. Only one side would survive the sunrise. The first wave came out of the clouds like ghosts. Radar screens glowed in the darkness below deck, lines sweeping in endless circles as faint echoes flickered and vanished. Men shouted bearings, their voices rising over the whine of generators and the low, trembling hum of the ship's heart. Out on the deck, sailors squinted into the horizon, the sky bleeding orange as the sun fought to break through the haze. Then came the sound, high, thin, growing. Engines. Dozens of them. The horizon shimmered with movement, black dots swelling into the shapes of aircraft. Kamikaze. The word spread across the deck like fire. Guns roared to life, tracers cutting through the morning air, shells exploding in bursts of white smoke and flame. The ships of the radar picket line, the lonely outpost stretched miles ahead of the main fleet, were the first to see death coming. Their radar antennas spun desperately, intercepting signals, jamming frequencies, trying to blind the attackers. The air filled with static, voices crackled through the radio, distorted by the invisible war of signals and counter-signals. Some operators heard phantom echoes, ghost planes that did not exist, tricks of electronic interference. But some were real. The first kamikaze broke through the smoke, its wings aflame, diving straight for the destroyer's bridge. A blinding flash. A wall of fire. Men were thrown into the sea, their screams swallowed by the roar of the explosion. The ship tilted, bleeding black smoke into the sky. On another vessel, radar operators adjusted dials with trembling hands, trying to lock onto the next wave. They had trained for months, but nothing could prepare them for this. The screen pulsed with light, and every pulse meant another soul falling from the sky. The Americans fought to keep the system alive, radar stations, jammers, intercept towers, all connected through a fragile web of radio energy. When one failed, another took its place. It was no longer just a naval battle, it was a war of signal invisible, merciless, and silent except for the screaming metal that followed every lost signal. In the command room of the flagship, officers watched the data come in, a storm of blips spreading like raindrops across the screen. They knew Okinawa was only miles away, but to reach it, they would have to survive a storm no map could show. Every radar pulse was a heartbeat, every jammed frequency a lifeline. The ocean glowed with burning oil. Smoke curled into the clouds, staining the dawn black. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the next wave was forming, guided by faith and desperation. The Americans tuned their machines, recalibrated frequencies, layered decoys over real ships, creating a maze of electronic ghosts. The Japanese pilots flew into it, blind but unwavering, guided only by instinct and the promise of immortality. The clash between technology and devotion had begun, and neither side understood the full price that would be paid before the sea went still again. The sea boiled with fire and smoke as the horizon vanished into chaos, the air thick with salt and burning fuel, the cries of men and the thunder of engines merging into a single, endless roar that shook the bones of the earth. Ships moved like wounded beasts, their decks slick with oil, sailors slipping, shouting, dragging hoses and ammunition while above them the sky tore open with shrieking metal. The radar screens still glowed in the darkened rooms below deck, the hum of electricity cutting through the panic as operators fought to keep their hands steady. Each flicker of the beam brought new blips, some real, some illusions created by the storm of jamming signals that filled the ether. The ANs had learned how to blind their enemies, but in doing so they often blinded themselves. A voice shouted coordinates, another called for bearing, the sound of typewriters clicking, radios hissing, men cursing as the invisible war of signals raged between two unseen hands. Every time the radar beam swept across the sky, it returned with echoes of death. Above, the kamikaze pilots pressed forward, the rising sun painted on their wings, their eyes fixed on the distant shimmer of ships that looked like specks of silver against the blue. They knew they would not return. Their instructors had told them that glory lay in flame, that to die like lightning was to live forever. Some whispered prayers, some bid down on photographs of their mothers, some screamed their emperor's name. The sky was their altar, and the sea would be their grave. Down below, an American gunner loaded his weapon, sweat pouring down his face as the gun deck vibrated beneath him. He could see the specks now, growing larger, wings flashing in the light. He aimed, fired, and felt the recoil crash through his shoulder as tracer rounds streaked upward. One plane exploded, then another, but for each that fell, 3 more came screaming down. The radar officers called out faster, their voices blending with the roar of the guns and the whine of the sirens. On the flagship, commanders watched the incoming data, dots swarming across the glass like locusts. Orders were shouted into radios, commands to maneuver, to shift frequencies, to activate decoys. The fleet was not fighting in one direction but in every direction at once, against air, against sea, against signals that could not be touched or seen. The Japanese had begun transmitting bursts of static to confuse the American systems, and in response, the Americans flooded the airwaves with false echoes, digital ghosts of ships that did not exist. It was a dance of deception across an invisible stage. The men who fought it never saw their enemies' faces. They only heard the silence between the static. As the first wave of kamikaze struck, the sky turned white with flame. The blast tore through the destroyer's midsection, flinging men into the air like rag dolls. The sound was not of an explosion but of something alive dying, a deep metallic scream that split the air. The ship shuddered, tilted, but refused to die. Pump the roaned, water rushed in, and still the gunners fired through the smoke, blinded but determined. In the command tower, a young lieutenant wiped blood from his eyes and shouted for status. The answer came in bursts of static. The radar room was gone. The antenna melted, and yet somewhere in the fleet, another signal took its place, another operator staring at another green circle, unaware that he too would soon be swallowed by the same storm. Night began to fall over the sea, but there was no darkness, only the light of burning ships reflecting off the clouds. The wind carried the smell of cordite and flesh. The waves glowed faintly with oil fires. Above it all, the radar pings continued, steady and relentless, like the heartbeat of a dying god. Night did not fall gently on the fleet. It descended like a curtain of ash, thick and trembling, the horizon erased by smoke and the glow of dying ships. The wind carried the whispers of static across the water, invisible threads connecting every vessel to the unseen battlefield in the air above. Radar screens pulsed like lonely eyes in the dark, each sweep of the beam searching for life and finding only echoes of ghosts. The operators were pale and hollow-eyed, their fingers trembling over dials, adjusting frequencies, hunting for the rhythm of the enemy's breath. Somewhere beyond the clouds, the kamikaze regrouped, circling, their radios dead, their hearts louder than the hum of their engines. They needed no signal, no command, the flame of belief guided them. Far below, the Americans built a shield of sound and signal, flooding the sky with electronic noise, false targets, illusions layered over the sea. Every frequency had become a weapon, every silence a trap. Static turned into thunder, and through that thunder came the faint pulse of life, the returning waves of radar that told them death was near. A destroyer drifted half dead in the current, its hull torn open, yet its radar dish still turned, its signal beacon blinking defiantly in the smoke. The ship had become more machine than man, a ghost still fighting for breath. Inside, men worked by red emergency light, faces blackened with soot, voices hoarse from shouting. They were engineers, gunners, dreamers, all bound by the same thin thread of electricity that kept the fleet alive. Above them, lightning flickered across the clouds, and for a heartbeat the sky was filled with silhouettes, planes, dozens of them, closing fast. The alarms sounded again, not in panic this time but in weary acceptance. The men knew what was coming. The guns roared to life, the barrels glowing red, the tracers cutting through the night like veins of fire. The first kamikaze fell in silence, its wings folding as it disappeared into the Black Sea, but the others came screaming down, the sound of their engines merging with the sirens until it was impossible to tell where man ended and machine began. A massive explosion lit the sky, waves of heat rolling across the decks. Metal twisted, screams echoed, but still the radar turned. On another ship, an operator stared at his screen, the green light reflecting in his eyes like a dying star. He could see the interference waves, the strange distortions that meant jamming. Somewhere out there, the enemy was trying to blind them, to turn their own technology against them. He reached for the frequency controls, shifting the band, pushing past the noise, searching for the truth buried beneath chaos. The signal cleared for a moment, just long enough to reveal a storm of incoming dots, faster than before, more precise. He shouted the coordinates, his voice cracking, and the ship turned into the wind, guns firing in every direction. The air became metal, the sea became fire, and above it all the radio channels screamed with the voices of dying men calling for help, for God, for silence. The commander of the fleet listened to the reports through the static, his face lit by the dim glow of the map table. Every new message was a dirge, every lost ship a verse in the song of the dead. Yet he could not look away. The radar network was his vision, and though the eyes bled, they must not close. He ordered the jammers to shift again, to confuse the next wave, to throw their echoes against the mountains of Okinawa itself. The air filled with invisible noise, like the roar of the earth itself crying out. In the confusion, some of the kamikaze turned off course, blinded by signals they could not understand. Others plunged ahead, guided by faith stronger than metal or code. When dawn began to rise, it came without warmth. The sky was gray and streaked with smoke, the water thick with debris and oil, the ships scarred but afloat. The men who survived looked toward the horizon and saw only ghosts drifting on the tide. The radar screens kept spinning, unblinking, their endless circles marking time in a world that had forgotten what time meant. The electronic war had only just begun, and the sea was not done with them yet. The morning after the storm was silent. The sea, once burning, now lay flat and gray, littered with oil and broken steel. Smoke hung like ghosts above the water. The survivors moved quietly, their faces hollow, their eyes fixed on the horizon that had swallowed so many. The radar screens still pulsed, but there were no more echoes, only the faint hum of power flowing through shattered wires. In that hum, some heard the voices of the dead. The electronic war had ended not with victory but with exhaustion. Both sides had given everything, machines and men alike consumed by the storm they had created. On the beaches of Okinawa, the last flames flickered and died, leaving only the sound of waves against the wreckage. The Americans had won the island, but no one cheered. The cost was too heavy, the silence too deep. As the sun broke through the haze, the light revealed the truth. War had entered a new age, one where battles would be fought not only with guns but with signals, codes, and invisible ghosts whispering across the air. Technology had survived, but humanity had changed forever.